The Minnesota Twins might be without Joe Ryan, but have they found their new ace in the interim? Find out on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is always cold, the Twins talk is always hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins opening their series against the Orioles with a 9-5 win on Monday. Here's how it happened. Dean Kremer is a brand new man. The new Twins ace dominated his former team during his first start in front of the Minnesota Twins faithful. He goes 9 up, 9 down to start out the game before Minnesota finally takes the lead with an Austin Martin solo homer. Baltimore finally gets runners on against Kremer in the top of the fourth. That's when Gunnar Henderson walks, and then Jackson Holliday hits a ball about 10 feet in front of the plate for an infield single. That gets Henderson all the way over to third. He comes in to score on a double steal attempt, touching home just before Holliday was tagged out at second for the final out of the inning. Minnesota gets the run right back, however, with Luke Keeschel getting hit by a pitch and moving to third on Brooks Lee's double. Then Kalen Culpepper drives him in on a sacrifice fly, and the game it goes in Minnesota's favor 2-1, and that's the score that it remains until the bottom of the seventh inning. In the meantime, Kremer retires the last 10 hitters he faces to finish the day, giving up just one run on one hit in 7 innings with 7 strikeouts. Now back to the bottom of the seventh, Ryan Kreidler and Austin Martin both get singles, and Ryan Jeffers has a 2-run hit to extend Minnesota's lead. Royce Lewis follows up with a 3-run homer, and that breaks the game open. Travis Adams will surrender a pair of runs in the 8th, but the Twins get both of those runs back with RBI hits from Jeffers and Lewis in the home half of the 8th. Taylor Rogers holds Baltimore to just 2 more runs in the 9th before finally retiring the side to end the game. Minnesota is now in second place in the AL Central, just percentage points ahead of the Detroit Tigers at 59-61. The Twins are 3.5 games behind the White Sox for the division lead and 1.5 games back of Texas for the last AL wildcard spot. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. You can find us on Twitter and YouTube as we are a part of the Grey Duck Sports Network. We are at Grey Duck Sports on both of those social media platforms, and then on TikTok we are at grey.duck.sports. There you can find podcast episodes as well as clips from all of our podcasts and different series of shorts that we are working on that have to do with Minnesota sports history. Again, that is at Grey Duck Sports on Twitter and on YouTube, and at grey.duck.sports over on TikTok. Well, how about Dean Kremer, folks? 2 starts for Minnesota, has given up just 2 runs, and we got to be on the wrong end of a pitcher getting revenge on his former team. 2 starts in a row, by the way, with Randy Dobnak getting 2 wins in a row, his first 2 wins in 5 years, both being against Minnesota, where he dominated Minnesota. And now we got to be the beneficiaries of Dean Kremer's revenge on his old team. Kremer was traded from Baltimore to Minnesota at the trade deadline, or a couple of days before the trade deadline, if we want to get technical. And Kremer has been money for Minnesota in the short sample size that he's been here. Again, has given up just 2 runs in 12 innings since coming over from Baltimore. He has shaved a whole 1.25 runs off of his ERA. It doesn't look good, the outside numbers. It's 5.25 at this moment. But it was 6.5 when he was originally acquired by the Minnesota Twins. So he is already doing some work to get that ERA down and has suddenly become the new Minnesota Twins ace. And the stuff was playing a little bit higher than it typically does for Kremer. You can credit that maybe to the adrenaline, or maybe it's just he is making the improvements with Ryan Jeffers behind home plate and Pete Mackey now as the pitching coach savant, trying to help him work through any kinks that he might have. And it's been good. A 35% whiff rate in this game against the Baltimore Orioles, and his splitter was nearly unhittable. The Orioles hitters swung at 14 of his splitters, and he got swings and misses on 5 of those. And again, the only hit that he gave up went about 10 feet in front of home plate. He was not giving up hard contact. He was controlling the zone. He only walked 1. He was able to get 7 strikeouts. Everything was going well for Dean Kremer in his revenge game against the Baltimore Orioles. So if he continues down this path, how does he factor into a potential postseason rotation when you have Joe Ryan, assuming he comes back from injury, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes? You also have guys like Taj Bradley, Dean Kremer, of course, Bailey Ober, and then, a rotation of the 5th spot that could be Connor Prela, probably not at that point because of the innings limit. Kendry Rojas would be my preference, or Zebby Matthews. Someone in that realm, probably whoever that 5th guy is not going to be one of your starters, and you are either going to use him as a long reliever, or you just might keep him off the postseason roster altogether. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in talking about the playoffs, because there's still a long way to go, and Minnesota is not even currently in a playoff position at this current moment, but it's something worth thinking about. You obviously go Joe Ryan in Game 1, but do you go with Taj Bradley, who's a bit younger but has more upside, in Game 2? Do you go with Dean Kremer, who provides more of the veteran presence and has been the epitome of steady throughout his major league career, up until this year, I guess, where his ERA has hovered right about in the same spot each and every year. So you almost know exactly what you're going to get from him on a start-to-start basis, especially if it starts to level out here in Minnesota before the end of the season hits, and he finds himself with another 4.1 ERA or something right around there by the end of 2026. He reminds me of just a better version of Bailey Ober, probably with a bit better stuff. Ober's stuff, it doesn't play. It's all location with him. Dean Kremer has some stuff, and it's a bit better than Bailey Ober's. Even the stuff that is below average for Dean Kremer is still ahead of what Bailey Ober provides, although most starting pitchers have stuff plus ratings that are ahead of Bailey Ober throughout Major League Baseball. But I would go Dean Kremer as my number 2 if the playoffs were to start today, and assuming that the Minnesota Twins would be in a wild card situation. Maybe if Joe Ryan wins Game 1, you kind of keep it fluid and you go with Taj Bradley in Game 2, so that if we do get to a Game 3, then you have the steady veteran as your starter in that game. But if you lose Game 1, I want, in a must-win situation, I would like Dean Kremer over Taj Bradley. And that's no shade to Taj Bradley. I think Taj Bradley is by far the better pitcher, but it just would concern me a little bit, the control issues that he can sometimes have if those were to pop up in a elimination game in either Game 2 or Game 3 of a wild card series. So I think Dean Kremer is your break in case of emergency guy in the wild card series. And if he doesn't pitch in the wild card series because you sweep with Ryan and Bradley and never have to go to Kremer in Game 2, and Bradley's able to get it done for you in Game 2, then Kremer is your Game 1 starter in the ALDS. But that's just me. You can let us know what you think down in the YouTube comments, the podcast comments below. But I think it should go Joe Ryan. If you win, sure, you can go to Bradley. You can. I would go still with probably Kremer to try and close it out. But if you lose, you in Game 1, you definitely go Dean Kremer, especially if he's going to continue to pitch like this. Again, 1.25 runs already shaved off of his ERA in just 2 starts since coming over from Baltimore. So that is something to hang our hats on. Now, I did miss this last weekend on Monday. We went to go see as a family Brand New Day, and we're out later than we expected on Sunday night, so I wasn't able to record because I also started a new job with Sports Info Solutions as a football scout that starts at 9 a.m., which isn't early Eastern time, but I'm not in Eastern time. I'm in Arizona time, which was currently 6 o'clock in the morning, so I had to wake up early and didn't have time to record the weekend podcast about the Milwaukee Brewers series. That was a fun series. Minnesota takes Game 1 after going down in that one early 4-0. They have moments and chances to win in Game 2 and Game 3 as well, but They lose both of those games, giving up the go-ahead run in the bottom of the 8th in Game 2 and then getting walked off in the bottom of the 10th in Game 3. Positives from that one is that, again, much like the Seattle series from a week before the Milwaukee series, it seemed like a playoff atmosphere. It seemed like we were living and dying with every single one of those at-bats, but now we can say that 2 weeks in a row, but it would be nice to start winning some of these playoff atmosphere series, as the Twins have gone 2-4 in those series that I've dubbed that. But the encouraging thing is that the Twins were able to put up 3 runs against Jacob Misiorowski and didn't look completely deflated against him, and that is a credit to Minnesota. I think the only way you're going to win games against Jacob Misiorowski is if you keep the game close enough and do enough damage, maybe to get 1 or 2 runs. The Twins got 3 off of him. Keep the game close enough with your pitcher to keep it a 3-2, 2-2, 2-1 sort of game, and then try and get at that Brewers bullpen. But the Brewers bullpen is also really, really good, and it was able to shut down Minnesota, who got the bases loaded in 2 of those games. Or in 2 of those innings in that final game, back-to-back innings, without being able to score a run in any of those 2 scenarios, showing some shades of the 2025 Twins, who never were able to get runs batted in with the bases loaded, and not the sign of the 2026, or not the shades of the 2026 Twins, which have been one of the top teams with the bases loaded in Major League Baseball this season. But they lose 2 of 3. They fall a little bit behind, and at one point were tied for 3rd place with Cleveland behind Detroit. Both of those teams were. Now they're just percentage points ahead of Detroit as we are in this homestand with Baltimore and Philadelphia coming up. But one of the things I would have said last night if I came on to the podcast to recap the series is that you need to start to get rid of some of these deadweight players, like Austin Martin, who failed to get a bunt down in a pivotal spot in that game against the Brewers. And you know what? I am glad that I didn't come on last night and say that, because Austin Martin had a hell of a game against Baltimore with the home run to get the scoring started. He gets 4 hits. He gets a stolen base, and was doing everything well at the top of the Twins lineup against a left-handed hitter, or a left-handed pitcher, rather. And that's what you need when Trevor Larnach has struggled as much as he has throughout his career against lefties. And he's been struggling just overall recently. But just because I might not cut Austin Martin at this moment doesn't mean that my point still stands about wanting to cut some of the dead weight off of this team. And what I mean by that is we went into the 2026 season, again with low expectations, but the hope that prospects would start to take over. And the only reason that we weren't going to bring them up almost immediately was because we didn't want a whole bunch of youngsters to get overwhelmed, and they still had some development to do to get to the major league level. And so you bring in placeholders, guys like Ryan Kreidler. Austin Martin, not necessarily a placeholder, think he would have been a utility guy no matter what, but Ryan Kreidler, Tristan Gray, Alex Jackson sometimes, Victor Caratini maybe not so much because of the 3-year deal. You could have even at this point called Matt Wallner one of those guys. And now these placeholders, they have overstayed their welcome because of a lot of positive contributions early on in the 2026 season that really helped this Twins team stay afloat and keep pace with an otherwise, mediocre American League wildcard race. Nobody's really pulling away, at least with that 3rd spot. Maybe with Boston and New York, those guys are pulling away with the 1st and 2nd wildcard spots now, but nobody's been running away with wildcard spot number 3. And yes, you credit those seat holders for their ability to perform above expectation in the time that they were allotted. But now I think reality has begun to sneak up on some of these guys. We've already seen Tristan Gray hit the head, and now it might be time for guys like Ryan Kreidler, for guys like Austin Martin, Alan Roden, even at this point. It may be time to move on from them and start to turn to some of these prospects. And the Twins have already gotten that process started. The Twins, to their credit, bring up Kalen Culpepper for that Milwaukee series, and he has a big home run in his first major league game against the Brewers, which the Twins won in that opener. and he took the place of Tristan Gray. Byron Buxton is going to come back soon. Ryan Kreidler's not really going to have much of a spot now with Kalen Culpepper at shortstop. I mean, maybe he can still be your backup center fielder, but it might be time to move on from Ryan Kreidler, who's not hitting well, who's been hitting poorly. Austin Martin, who was hitting poorly up until this last game, I would have said it's probably time to start to move on from him for someone like Walker Jenkins or Gabriel Gonzalez or Henry Mendez. Or once Emmanuel Rodriguez gets healthy, then Emmanuel Rodriguez, too. There are some really good hitting prospects that are still hitting at St. Paul that, as of right now, we have not seen. But I still think they have a big role to play in the 2026 Twins season. And that's exciting to think about. There are players that we have not yet seen that are going to play a big role for us down the stretch and into the postseason. There are guys that we have not seen that might have postseason heroic moments for the Minnesota Twins. And I am anticipating that. But in order to get those guys up, we have to start to shuffle out some of these seat holders, these placeholders. And we thank them again for their service and for performing so well and better than we thought. But the regression is here, and you don't want them to overstay their welcome for too long, because then you might fall out of the playoff race. The logjam is unfortunately, I think, something that is hurting the Twins and preventing them from getting out to, well, from first getting a wild card spot and then pulling away from the rest of the teams. I think if you have Walker Jenkins up here, I think if you have Emma Rodriguez and or Gabriel Gonzalez and or Henry Mendez up here, then you are going to start to hit a lot better, and you're going to start to pull away. So, Twins front office, let's get this done. Remove the seat holders, bring in the highly touted folks, and let's begin this Cinderella 2026 home stretch run with the young guys leading the charge, just like we all wanted to see at some point during this 2026 season, now with a team that has surpassed our wildest expectations for this year. But speaking of Kalen Culpepper, so far, so good. Obviously, the home run, he's gotten on base a bunch via some like hit by pitch and walks, but he only has that one hit. He's hitting 111 at this point, but the OPS is high. I mean, you're not, even if the numbers were really good, really bad, whatever it is, you're not reading too much into those numbers just 3 games into a major league career. But he looks like he can be a competent hitter when you homer in your first game. I guess that is going to leave an impression for at least a couple of weeks that you can be a major league hitter. And let's see how this continues to play out. I would love to see him get a lot of reps at shortstop to see how good his defense is. Obviously, there would be one scenario in my last little point where you'd keep Ryan Kreidler on the team, and that would be if Kalen Culpepper's defense is starting to lag behind, and then maybe you put Kalen Culpepper at another position. But from what we've seen so far, he looks like a guy that can get the job done at the major league level. I mean, I think there's still a wide range of outcomes as to who Kalen Culpepper will be as a major league player, but I think he's started to erase some of the lowest ends of those outcomes and has proven himself to be a competent player. So let's hope that continues as we I don't know if the Twins are planning to platoon him and use him mostly just against lefties, or if he's going to, start what the pattern's been so far, which is just 2 out of every 3 games, as he continues to get his feet wet at the major league level. We'll see if they want to baptize him through fire or kind of pace him as we get down to the home stretch. And I guess with Ryan Kreidler, you do have that affords you that ability to keep Culpepper out of the lineup once every few days. But I want to see Culpepper more than I see Ryan Kreidler down the stretch, as good as we have seen Ryan Kreidler at points this season. So those are your big heroes from this game, the guys that stood out the most: Dean Kramer, Austin Martin, and Kalen Culpepper. Those guys are making the big plays during the present day. Obviously, Ryan Jeffers with a big game as well. We don't even have to. He's been a hero all season long and has continued to do that. The Twins need to lock him up to an extension like immediately. So hopefully they are able to do something like that soon, or after the season ends, before free agency starts. Obviously, I don't know how the whole offseason schedule is going to work this year with the lockout looming and the collective bargaining stuff, yada, yada, yada. But I want Ryan Jeffers to be a part of the future of the Minnesota Twins because I think he has taken that next step forward offensively, and I've been saying it since the first game of the season where his swing just looked different and the at-bats he was taking looked a lot better than the ones that he had taken when he was even an above average offensive hitting catcher, just like plain above average, like a 105, 106 OPS sort of guy. His at-bats now have looked better, and it's led him to be like a 120, 130 OPS type of guy, which is an all-star level if you are a catcher. But those guys are the present, and in the near future, we should see a couple of superstars, a couple of all-stars returning to this Minnesota Twins team. As Matthew Leach on MLB.com, he's the Twins reporter for MLB.com, he says that Byron Buxton is going to come to the park on Tuesday, and if in his workout he is feeling good with his hip impingement, which again is going to bother him throughout the rest of the season, and it won't be until the offseason until he'll have time to finally fully recover from that. So it's going to be just touch and go the rest of the way. But if he feels good on Tuesday, the plan is for him to get back this weekend against the Phillies. And how romantic, poetic would it be for him to come back in that Field of Dreams game on Saturday? I think that would be something. The Field of Dreams has been a magical game every time it has been played. I mean, who can forget the White Sox and Yankees that kind of got it all started back in 2021, where the teams went back and forth. White Sox had a lead. Yankees tied it up, getting the best of Liam Hendricks. And then Tim Anderson hits the walk-off home run and sends every Chicago White Sox fan home happy. It was just like a very storybook sort of game. So how about for our storybook, we get Byron Buxton back for the Field of Dreams games, and he comes up and hits a walk-off home run a la Tim Anderson in 2021. That would be something, and it would give the Minnesota Twins some momentum. Obviously, just getting a win, any win is pivotal at that point, but also getting the momentum as you hit the final 6 or 7 weeks of the season, and obviously beating a very good Philadelphia Phillies team would give you a lot of confidence as well. So that is some bit of good news, is that Byron Buxton could return by this weekend. Joe Ryan, his timeline's still a little bit up in the air, but he has begun throwing on flat ground, so he is at the very least beginning that rehab process, that recovery process. Again, it was not an arm injury that has him sidelined. It was a glute injury, I believe a left glute injury for Joe Ryan. So it's not the one that he pushes off the mound with, but it's the one that he lands with, which might hurt his mechanics just a little bit. But he has begun throwing on flat ground, and again, all signs are pointing to it being not a major injury for Joe Ryan. Again, we'll see if that's the case, and maybe this time of rest has allowed him to rejuvenate, and he'll be ready to go as the old Joe Ryan and not the second half Joe Ryan that we've seen season after season once he returns from the injured list. But the Minnesota Twins are going to get both of those guys back, and I think it's worth noting that the Mariners series and the Brewers series, both of which we said were series that gave off a playoff atmosphere, the Twins played tight in those games even without their top player in Byron Buxton. I don't think Joe Ryan pitched in either of the two. I mean, obviously he wasn't there for the Milwaukee series, but didn't pitch in the Seattle series either. So even in those, both of those guys were not playing in the two series that we have, or that I have termed as playoff-like atmospheres against Seattle and Milwaukee, and the Twins still played tight in those. So hopefully, once those guys get back, those close losses turn into 2 to 3 run wins, and the Twins start to get on a run of like 8 wins in 10 games and start to really take hold of the wild card spot or even an AL Central spot. And here's the thing, if you win the AL Central, it's not as if the AL West winner is lighting the world on fire either. The AL West winner and AL Central winner, whoever has the best record out of those two, will get a bye. So if you go on a run and the AL West continues to be as muddled as it has been all season, you might be getting yourself out of the wild card round altogether if you can get past the Chicago White Sox. So that should obviously be the on the hierarchy of goals, that should have a higher level of priority than just getting the wild card. But we will see where that all goes, because if you can get a bye through the first round, anything can happen from the DS. Then you get into the championship series maybe, and who knows? We don't want to dream too big, but Twinkie Town Tavern, sometimes the beer can tickle our fancies a little bit too much, and maybe we're starting to daydream about the Minnesota Twins in a World Series. Still a long way to go from that ever being in the realm of possibility, but again, stranger things have happened. Worse teams, maybe not worse teams, but bad teams, or at least not as good teams, have made the World Series in seasons past. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility, even if it is out of the realm of great probability. So if we get those two guys back, that's certainly going to help us down the stretch. Now we've talked about the present, we've talked about the future. Let's talk about a completely different branch of reality. A reality where the Minnesota Twins made two trades that we now have reports they were in conversations to try and make during the trade deadline. And this is coming from Dan Hayes in The Athletic. It's worth noting the Twins were in or trying to kick the tires at least on Kevin Gausman. That obviously didn't materialize. But two players that the Twins were very interested in at the deadline were Zach Neto, the shortstop of the Los Angeles Angels, and Jose Soriano, who, by the time the Twins were interested in him, was not on the Angels any longer, but was on the Toronto Blue Jays. So a couple of interesting articles that when the Twins went to try and go get Zach Neto, the Twins drew a hard line in the sand when the Angels said the only way they would trade Zach Neto is if Minnesota was willing to give up Walker Jenkins. And then the Twins, or the Angels, they traded Jose Soriano for a pretty good haul from the Blue Jays, who weren't buying but who were selling, but also giving themselves some assets for the 2027 season, where they can kind of reset and then go for another run after a season that hasn't lived up to what their expectations were following the AL pennant win last year. So they get Jose Soriano, but at that point, the Blue Jays were even shopping Jose Soriano after getting him, or at least the Twins thought they might be shopping them, because the Twins asked what the Blue Jays would want, and the Blue Jays, according to the Dan Hayes article, said that they wanted Kalen Culpepper as well as Riley Quick in the Twins system, one of the Twins' top pitching prospects, and then obviously a top 5 prospect in Kalen Culpepper within the organization. So let's just walk through those trades, because Zach Neto certainly is enticing, and I am somebody that will tend to err on the side of proven assets over high ceiling prospects. And Zach Neto is a proven asset at the major league level. Back-to-back seasons with 5 wins above replacement, that is all-star level shortstop. Even if you may look at the overall numbers and say, well, he's only hitting .230 this year, how good can he be? This year is a little bit of a down year for him, but he's still on pace to be a 3.5-4 win player, which is a bit below all-star pace. But still, that is a 14 wins above replacement player over the last 3 years. That is very good value. That is an excellent sort of player that you can have to lock down your shortstop position. And most of the time I'd be like, okay, yeah, I would be willing to make that deal because it is a proven commodity. And Walker Jenkins, as good as we think he's going to be, is not a proven commodity. But I think I also would have drawn the line at Walker Jenkins. If they said they wanted Emmanuel Rodriguez, sure, because I think Emmanuel Rodriguez is just going to be, he's been plagued by injuries so far, so who's to say that is going to change? If they wanted Kalen Culpepper, yes, and maybe another high level like Gabriel Gonzalez, sure, but I think Walker Jenkins is going to be special. When I see Walker Jenkins swing, It is a swing that is eerily similar to that of a former Minnesota Twin whose number is retired, who recently went into the Hall of Fame. It looks just like Joe Mauer's swing. And I'm not going to say Walker Jenkins is going to be Joe Mauer, and maybe it's purely for the sentimental purposes of wanting to see a Joe Mauer-like swing at Target Field, even if it's by a different player for the next 15 years. But I think that Walker Jenkins could be special, and I'm glad the Twins did not give him up even for a known commodity in Zach Neto. I'm excited to see what Walker Jenkins can do at this level, and hopefully it comes sometime during this 2026 season. You might be able to talk me into the Jose Soriano trade, though, if I was Jeremy Zoll. And they asked for Kalen Culpepper and Riley Quick. It would be a lot to give up with two bigger named prospects within the Twins system. But Jose Soriano is also a pretty good pitcher whose under the hood metrics scream that he's better than his decent surface level metrics, and that he's going to project to be even better than that as he continues into his career. I would bank on that, but really I would hope that a Kalen Culpepper, Riley Quick sort of package could have been had for Zach Neto. I would have gone back to the Angels and said, well, if you want Kalen Culpepper and Riley Quick and Henry Mendez, then we can make something happen here, but we're not going to give up Walker Jenkins. I would like to match the prospect or mismatch the prospect packages to pick and choose here to do the Zach Neto deal by giving up Kalen Culpepper and Riley Quick. I don't think I'd want to give up Kalen Culpepper and Riley Quick for Jose Soriano, who I think is a little bit more of a question mark than Zach Neto is. And obviously giving up Kalen Culpepper for a pitcher would help your pitching depth, but would give you a hole at the shortstop position if you gave up a shortstop prospect for a shortstop, along with a pitching prospect and maybe some other sweeteners in that deal. Then you at least are keeping, you have a better, perhaps upgrade at the shortstop position in Zach Neto. We're just talking about hypotheticals because obviously none of these things came to be, but it is interesting to think about what could have happened if Minnesota made those deals at the deadline. Would you have made those deals? Would you have given up Walker Jenkins for Zach Neto or Kalen Culpepper and Riley Quick for Jose Soriano? Let us know in the comments below. Again, I would be hesitant to the Jenkins for Neto, maybe a little bit more open to the Soriano Culpepper deal. As it stands, neither of those trades were made, so it's not something that we have to worry too much more about throughout the rest of the 2026 season. What we do have to worry about is a game tomorrow between your Minnesota Twins and the Baltimore Orioles. The Twins will go for the series win as they send Bailey Ober to the mound against Brandon Young. Ober is 7-3 with a 4.45 ERA. Brandon Young, a good pitcher for Baltimore, 8-3 with a 3.43 ERA, and that game will get started at 6:40 p.m. Central Time at Target Field. Hopefully the Minnesota Twins can pull that one out and get closer in this wild card and AL Central race. And that's going to be the last call on the Twins Talk for tonight. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins!